Hey everybody, welcome back to Health for Online. I have gotten some emails from people, some introductory emails, so that's been nice to get to know people. I'll send you a response soon and talk to you about your certain responses. Just to give you, I guess, my own version. So again, I'm Megan Knoll, I'm your instructor, and I'm in this class because I'm the instructor. And one of the healthy habits that I have is avoiding mental stress. It's taken a very long time to figure out how to do this, but it is a very important habit, so I'm very happy to have it. But some habits that I want to pick up are to drink more water and develop better sleeping habits. So when you're thinking about what habits you want to pick up and like why they might be important to you, I notice you could use these. These are good things that everyone should have, but this is the example I have. So I know that I tend to drink lots and lots of coffee all day because I'm very sleepy, and then I get home and I can't sleep, and so then I sleep badly, and the next day I drink lots and lots of coffee instead of water. And so that's definitely some kind of cue and routine that I need to change. And we talked about that in the last lecture. And so I think if I drink more water, I will drink less caffeine, and then I'll sleep better, and then I will not need as much coffee, etc., etc. I say that, and I have a big old glass of tea next to me, but that's okay. Okay, so one of the things I asked you was to tell me something that you believe makes a good instructor, what you need in an instructor. And so my favorite instructors always were very passionate about what they teach. And do make sure, one of the questions asked, do you have access to the online portal? Remember, this is essential for this class. Most of your assignments, anything other than this introductory email, are going to be done through this portal, and that includes your quizzes. So please make sure you have access to that very soon if you don't already. Okay, so let's talk about something I'm very passionate about, which is stress and psychological health. So I don't know how much of my background any of you know, but I did my college degree and my graduate degree at University of Texas in Austin, and I looked at specifically, I did the neuroendocrinology of stress. So I was looking at how different animals handle stress in the brain. So what specifically, if you stress an animal, what happens to its brain? Because as we all know, stress happens and it does bad things to us. And it seems very obvious now that we know it's important to limit our stress. If we get too stressed, we can get sick. But this wasn't a prevailing idea until maybe the 60s, if not the 70s. So it's a newer thing. So the reason why you hear so much about mindfulness apps or meditation apps is because people are realizing, we don't allow time for ourselves to relax in our schedules. And the less time you give yourself to relax, you tend to see a correlation between that and people getting sick. And so today we're going to talk about why that is and how you can try and limit that and what roadblocks you may have to this, and what you can do about that. Alright, so it all comes from the brain. And so there's this prevailing idea that in westernized cultures or in developed nations, we don't worry about things like diphtheria or cholera killing us. Okay, these are infectious diseases that you have to worry about when you live in a country that doesn't have a decent agricultural system or good water sources. Okay, so these are things that animals tend to worry about. Is something going to eat me? Am I going to get horribly sick and die from something that could be treated by antibiotics, etc.? These are things most animals are worried about, except they don't worry about these things because there's no reason to worry about them. If you know your whole life is to avoid predators, eat as much as possible, and make babies, those are your big three things in your life you have to worry about. You don't actually worry about it, it's just your life, okay? But in humans, especially in developed nations, we tend to have gotten away from this. We don't worry, is a predator going to eat me? Okay, we aren't worried about lions attacking us in the street. We're worried about things like different kinds of predators. So we worry about sexual predators. We worry about sketchy neighborhoods being dangerous to live in and that kind of thing. But a lot of times what we're worried about are things that we do to ourselves based on our society. So we basically worry ourselves to death before things like cholera can kill us. And so let's go into that. Okay, so the big idea here is that we're going to be talking about, the screen never wants to work, right? There you go. We're going to be talking about how stress affects our nervous systems and our endocrine systems. So the endocrine system is a system that deals with hormones. Any of you who've had my anatomy class before know all about how much I love the endocrine system. So the endocrine system controls our hormones and secretes hormones based on signals that our body and the environment gives us. Now, these hormones then cause changes in our bodies, okay? So the thing we think about most when we think about endocrinology or hormones is the hormones that you deal with at puberty. And it's very obvious that the hormones you deal with at puberty cause changes in your body. But that's kind of when people tend to stop thinking about hormones unless they're dealing with menopause, okay? So then, and that's a lack of hormones. But there's so much more to endocrinology than just testosterone and estrogen, and we're going to talk about that, okay? We can adapt to stress, but there is a limit at which we can no longer adapt to it, and that adaptation itself starts to affect our bodies, okay? And we can, because a lot of this, the stress starts in our brain and is controlled by our brain, this can lead to a lot of psychological health issues. And so, So psychological health is our ability to think and act positively while positively interacting with others. Stress can interfere with this by causing things such as anxiety, mood disorders, and personality disorders. And some of these things could be something you're born with, and some of these things can be developed over time due to stress. So we're going to talk a lot about those things. So every single one of us in this class on this planet has dealt with stress or has had to deal with stress. Sometimes stress feels different in different situations and to different people's. Emotional and physical responses caused by an unanticipated, disruptive, or stimulating event is called stress. Anything that moves you out of what is called homeostasis or your normal state of being is a stressor. Okay, so if you're moved out of just your normal, everyday either state of mind or physicalness is not a word, physical state, that is a stress, okay? You are experiencing stress. Our bodies react the same way to both good and bad stresses because it gets you ready to handle a stress. So there are good stresses. And our body reacts the exact same way to is that a lion that's about to eat me? As it does, do I have to take a test today? Those are clearly two very different stressors, but our body reacts the exact same way. Because as far as our brain is concerned, in evolutionary history, we're still living on the plains or wherever humans evolved and worried about animals eating us. Our evolution has not caught up with the fact that taking a test is not the same as about to be eaten by a predator. And so it reacts the exact same way. And so in some cases, that's a good thing, and we like that kind of stress, not getting eaten by a predator, but we're going to talk about how there are what are called eustresses, or good stress. So eu means true, so okay. And these are stresses that allow us to change, adapt, and grow. So this is where you're doing a hard problem in a math class, and it hurts your brain a little bit, it's stressing you out a little bit, but once you get past that, you have that aha moment, that moment where you're like, oh my god, I can do this. That stress has allowed you to be focused and get further and adapt and grow. If you're about to take a test that you're really worried about, like you're going to law school and you're worried about the LSAT, or you're going to go to grad school and you're worried about the GRE, or whatever test you're about to take, even a quiz in this class, you want to go into it just a little bit hungry because your body's going to be a little bit stressed because it's like, well, you're hungry, when are we going to eat next? And because you're a little bit stressed, you're a little bit more alert and you're going to be better prepared. Your body's going to be ready to take on any challenge that comes to it, even if it's just a quiz. Okay, so that is considered a good stress because it lets you change and adapt. If these are things that we seek out, okay? So this is something such as the adrenaline rush you get during a roller coaster ride. That's a stress, but because your brain is predisposed to like it, because you got on that roller coaster on purpose, or you went to compete in the Olympics on purpose, then you're going to be able to react to that stress in a positive way. So you're going to scream in joy when you run, when you're on the roller coaster, or if you're watching a horror movie and the slasher character comes out and scares the scared teenagers, you're going to react in a positive way. You're going to like that rush, versus if that happened in real life and you were not expecting it, that's terrifying and you feel fear because of that stress. So it's all about how you perceive the stress, if it's a good or a bad stress. Any kind of anticipation when you start something new, or if you're about to do a big sporting event, or let's call it exam exhilaration. So you're like, do I know how to do this test? It's gonna be awesome. It's gonna be great. Or if you get done with the test and you're like, yes, I'm done. That's a good stress. That's a eustress. Okay. When you are in distress, that is the bad stress, this is going to be something that usually what's happening is your brain is not predisposed to like it. You're worried about something. Because you're worried, you direct your energy. You basically are telling your body, use up your energy faster or we're gonna die. Because even though your body doesn't understand, your brain doesn't understand that you're just taking a test or you're just in a job interview, your body is like, oh my god, that lion is about to eat us. We better run away as fast as possible. But you're just sitting there in a job interview. So it depletes our energy really quickly and makes us tired. It is, something real quick about eustress. Eustress also, if you're a little bit sick, good stress or eustress will cause your immune system to perk up and say, oh my god, let's fight that thing, and be really active and take care of it. Over time with distress or chronic stress, if you have a lot of chronic stress, you've depleted so much energy, you're basically wearing out the system, and you could end up getting sick. So there are a lot of diseases that happen as a result of distress or too much stress. Okay? So a stressor is anything, an agent or a situation that causes stress. And because there is good and bad stress, there are good and bad stressors, okay? So any major life event or change can lead to increased stress. Anyone who's gotten married can tell you it's a very stressful process. Anyone who's made a big move or gone to college can tell you it's really stressful. But it's how you react to these stressors in many different ways, either physically or mentally, that can cause long-term effects or not, okay? So a whole lot of homework, if you feel really overwhelmed by all your homework and you can't even get started, that is a stressor that you interpret negatively, and so you're going to be more tired and more prone to being sick as a result. Whereas getting married could be something that you, if you're stressed out about a wedding, or oh my god, I have to do this presentation, oh my god, but you are like, okay, but it's a good thing, I'm doing it on purpose. Because you're perceiving it as a good thing, you are less likely to get sick as a result. My brain is weird like that. So take a second and think to yourself, what are your main stressors? Just kind of, and this is something you hear in meditation apps. Close your eyes for a second, take a deep breath, and just think about what your stresses are. Because if we identify what our stressors are, we can start to learn how to perceive them and maybe even get rid of them. So this could be, we're going to talk about how there's a relationship between high stress jobs and high rates of heart attack and blood pressure, and this is not a coincidence. So things like wait staff or nurses and social workers and assembly line workers, these are all people who experience a lot of stress constantly, and they tend to have very high blood pressure and high risk of heart attack. Now, if you're an ER doctor, I know a lot of people who are just so excited about being an ER doctor or being an EMT in an ambulance. There are people who seek out stress. So these are your stimulus seekers who want to go skydiving, and they want to get all the piercings, and they want to do all these things that other people might think are really dangerous in certain situations. But because they're stimulus seekers, your stimulus seekers are interpreting that stress always positively, and they always want to seek it out, because that thrill of the rush of adrenaline that also comes with some of that dopamine that makes us so happy that stimulates them, and they interpret it in a good way, and so they want to seek it out more. Okay, so your ER doctors tend to be the people who are stimulus seekers, who they really enjoy that rush of the stress of someone coming in needing an ER doctor makes them happy. Okay, so it activates the adrenaline and a dopamine response that makes them enjoy the situation, and they seek it out. Now, if you're someone who the idea of being presented with someone else's trauma makes you a little nauseous, you're probably in that case going to be a stimulus avoider. You don't interpret that stress as an exciting thing. You may interpret a different kind of stress in exciting ways, like watching horror movies or going on really crazy roller coasters or whatever. That's just what your preference is. Now, it's when you seek out these stressors, seek out dangerous stressors to kind of fulfill that stimulus-seeking behavior, that things become dangerous. If you seek out unsafe sex habits, if you seek out dangerous drugs, etc., then you're fulfilling that need to be stimulated by that stressor in a bad way. And also, well, we'll get. Let me not get ahead of myself. Okay, so let's talk about stressors in our lives. So, there are so many different stressors in our lives, especially as college students, and depending on the political climate and home, everything, okay? So things like major life changes, poor time management, these things can lead to a lot of stress. So if you have poor time management, you start to feel yourself get more and more stressed because you are thinking about the thing you need to do and how you don't have time, and then you're stressed about that, and that leads to poor decision making, which leads to more stress, which makes you tired, which means you're going to have more stress, and you're going to miss deadlines, you're going to be overwhelmed. That's going to be something that is definitely a major stressor. Anytime someone is isolated, or if you have a lack of social contacts, this can be major stressors. You often hear about people who commit major acts of mass violence tend to be, they were loners, they were this, blah, blah. That's not an excuse for their behavior, but it is a direct correlation. People who don't have social contacts, they're missing out on that part of their wellness, that social aspect to their wellness, and so that can lead to mental disorders and a lot of stress. Okay, so hopefully everyone in this class has, this is an online class, and it stresses me out a little bit that I can't meet each of you, because I am a resource for you all as far as a social contact is concerned. You can always reach out to me. And if this were a class where we're meeting together, you would also meet each other and get each other's information and become study buddies and things. So please, if you can, make sure you have some kind of social connection to support yourself, especially in a class like this that goes really fast and has a lot of work involved. Discrimination is definitely a stressor. So part of it is because in this case, a lot of times you could worry about dying as a result, okay? Or you could worry about bodily harm happening. There is a huge difference in the life expectancy of African Americans in the south of the U.S. because a lot of times that discrimination leads to people being killed, and so there's no easy way to say that at all, and there shouldn't be. And it's this. So just by putting yourself in an environment where you will be discriminated, because of whatever society you're in or whatever kind of social climate, it's not okay. Said that badly. It's not your fault that you put yourself in that situation, but because of whatever the situation is, once you have these kinds of discrimination going on, the stress becomes very serious and very real because you are interpreting what could be a dangerous situation. Even if you're in a situation where, if you live in, Northern California and you live in San Francisco where everybody loves everybody, there might still always be kind of an underlying fear of discrimination based on disability, gender, and race. And that is something people have to worry about all the time. So if this is something you don't have to worry about, that is a case of privilege, and it's something you should be aware of when you are interacting with other people. You may have the complete best intentions, but one thing you can do to decrease other people's stress is to be aware of these things. Unemployment definitely is a major stressor in people's lives. As unemployment rates go up, suicide rates tend to follow, which is terrifying. And this is our version now in the society we live in as humans of, as animals we would go out and find our own food, but as humans we have to bring in money so we can buy food and we can buy housing and everything that we need. So to be unemployed is to invite major stressors into your life, and it's, I don't think I need to add anything else to that. Any kind of unresolved anger. So this is a lot of the reason why talk therapy is really helpful for a lot of people. Unresolved anger kind of is a simmering chronic stress. So, and it's interesting because there was a study done on people who sit in traffic. So when I lived and I worked in San Francisco and I would commute to Monterey Bay, And that wasn't so bad. It was 2 hours, but there was no traffic. It was very easy. I could listen to podcasts or music. It was fine. But when I would have to commute into San Francisco from where I was living, it would take 2 hours, and it would all be sitting in traffic, and it was horrible. And I would just get so mad, and I obviously, anytime we deal with some kind of a traffic situation, it's a very easy place to see that stress starts to cause anger, and then that can lead to things like road rage. And I've seen situations where someone will honk at someone else and that person will be offended for whatever reason. And I saw a guy once pull another guy out of a little old man got pulled out of his truck by a guy who was really angry he got honked at, and the guy just hauled the guy out of the truck and punched him right in the face in traffic, and it was terrifying. But anyway, so that's a stressor for me, and it was definitely a stressor for that guy, but the guy who did the punching had this unresolved anger of sitting in traffic for so long, which then spilled out into a fight or flight response, which we'll talk about in a second, which showed itself as fight, okay? So, not great. So, based on that traffic example that I was giving, there was a study done where people were going to monitor people who were sitting in traffic to see what their blood pressures were like. Okay, because it makes sense that if you're sitting in traffic for a really long time, your blood pressure starts to go up. Well, at what point is it really dangerous? And so they sat in these cars, the scientists sat in the cars with these people who are driving in their commute and were sitting in traffic, and the people didn't have high blood pressures, and they couldn't figure it out. They're like, well, but we're sitting in traffic, and you usually are really mad and cussing at everybody. Why is it that you don't have high blood pressure? And it turns out just the simple act of having someone to talk to about how mad you are about a situation decreases stress. So and that's where that social contact comes in. So even if you don't have someone to sit and talk to about whatever's making you angry at that moment, if you go and you write about it, if you go and you talk to someone about it later, it's still going to help you resolve that anger in a way that leads to less stress. Very important. Job stress, this is how, we spend a huge chunk of our lives in our jobs, and it's listed as the number one cause of stress for Americans. And so this is something we definitely have to think about. So remember, there's something called occupational wellness. A lot of it has to do with how much stress are you getting at work. So there's so many different versions of job stress that we'll just leave it at that. There are toxic work environments that cause emotional stress. There are physical stressors. We'll keep going. I could go on forever. And then specifically, we all have college stress or academic stress, interpersonal stress, financial stress. I am still paying off my college loans, even though I am 37. Oh my God, you guys. And so it's a stress. So it's something that is whenever I think about how much debt I still have, it hurts my brain. Like I can just tell that I'm going to start freaking out. I start hyperventilating a little bit, and I realize, that I am inducing a stressor because I'm thinking about this way. I'm inducing stress in my own body. If I keep this up for too long, I'm going to go into distress, and I could possibly make myself sick just thinking about that, because that's how ridiculously powerful our brains are. We can put ourselves into a state of distress just by thinking about it. If you think about your loved one dying, you can put yourself into a state of stress where you could, depending on how other parts of your health are, you could seriously hurt yourself. So there are cases of people, whenever someone says, they died of a broken heart, what normally is actually happening is, and this actually goes nicely into this one, if you get a stressor, your nervous and your endocrine systems work together to try and prime your body to act quickly and appropriately. So if you get a news that a loved one has died, your body freaks out. Your nervous system says, something bad happened, and then it tells your endocrine system, get us ready to deal with this bad thing that happened. Well, if you don't have a healthy heart, if you're an older individual and your heart suddenly starts beating really quickly as if you're about to run away from a lion, it can't handle that, and you could have a heart attack as a result. So that tends to be what's happening when people die of a broken heart. You don't actually die. Your heart doesn't break. It's just that it's reacting to the stress so much of something emotional that you end up having a heart attack. Still horrible, but not the same as... It's more romantic to say they died of a broken heart than to say, they had a nervous reaction to a stressor and then their heart gave out. So let's talk about some of these chemical reactions that prime the body to act quickly and appropriately. Okay, so you perceive a stress, either internally or externally, and you do that using your brain or your nerves, okay? So either your brain perceives something, like you hear something, you see something, etc., or you feel a stressor on your body, okay? You take in that information, and then your brain brings it all together and decides, should I do something about this, okay? There are two versions of the action. You're either going to do something voluntarily or involuntarily. So your somatic system is the one that says, oh, this movie is really upsetting me, I'm going to make a voluntary choice to not watch the movie, okay? Or it's so anytime you're using a muscle on purpose, that's a somatic response, okay? Your involuntary responses, or your autonomic, because automatic sounded not fancy enough, I guess, your autonomic system is the system that's going to react without your consciously telling it to react. So if you step on a Lego and you move your foot really quickly, that is your autonomic response, okay? So you don't sit there and think, oh no, my foot hurts. Your reflex arc reacts as a result of stepping on the Lego before you can even think about it, okay? So that's involuntary. So the nervous system handles very short-term stress or acute stress. So this is basically your body's way of saying, something bad's happening right now, just get away from it, okay? So we can look at that autonomic system. We can break this down into the parasympathetic system, which is your relaxed state. So if you're just sitting back and listening to this and nothing's really bothering you, you are activating just your parasympathetic system, okay? You're relaxed, your heart rate is low, your pupils are maybe not as dilated, your blood pressure is low, hopefully your emotional state is good because you're just chilling out, okay? Once you go into a stress state, that's going to activate your sympathetic nervous system, and that's stimulated, okay? So that is alert, waiting for action, just tell me what to do and I'll do it, okay? That is your system that is ready for action. Okay, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because this isn't anatomy. Actually, looking at this, we're not going to spend any time. Moving right along. The important thing about this to note is when we talk about what are called neurotransmitters, those are, if this is the end of one neuron, which is the cell that moves the signal in your nervous system, at the end of it, it releases neurotransmitters onto either a muscle or another neuron or a gland or something. It's basically the instructions that go from your nervous system to the rest of your body are these chemicals called neurotransmitters, okay? So neurotransmitters are chemical signals. They're released into the space between either a nerve cell and a muscle or two nerve cells or a nerve cell and anything. And let's see where we're going with this. The important thing here is if you've ever been on, so in a normal system, you are taking in these signals that say, hey, I saw a sad thing, and this nerve says, hey, do the thing we do when we're sad, and it sends it to this, and then this goes and it acts on the tear ducts, and you cry, okay? Now, let's say you're missing some of these neurotransmitters, or for some reason you don't have enough receptors on the other side to pick up those neurotransmitters, where you're going to get a blunted signal, okay? So, I'm getting ahead of myself. I just realized that's when we're talking about depression. We'll get back to that in a second. But when your nervous system is talking to anything, it's dropping these neurotransmitters on the next part of the system to cause it to do an action, okay? So, oh, I guess I'm getting there. So, when you're talking about adrenaline, which is also called epinephrine, so that's a neurotransmitter, especially norepinephrine, that gets sent through the axon, or it's released from the axon onto a target, and adrenaline gets released onto its target, and it says, oh my god, get ready, we're gonna do a thing! And it gets you excited and pumped, and not excited in like a happy, you might be happy, you might not be happy, but in a way that you're ready to do something. So if you've ever been so freaked out and nervous that you feel kind of buzzy, it's because your muscles are primed and ready to just take off and do something, because for all your brain knows, you're about to be eaten by a lion, even though what's really happening is you're really, really mad about that customer who is being a jerk and it's stressing you out. Okay, so that is an immediate response because you're ready. These neurons act crazy fast and they're ready to do something about this thing. So what happens if you get stressed and you don't have enough of that chemical, or if it's missing altogether? So if you can't send those nervous signals, you can get some sort of a mental dysfunction. Okay, because every time you have a stressor, your brain has to kind of reset and say, hey, everything's cool, everybody chill out. Okay? if you don't have that neurotransmitter that says, hey, everybody chill out, like serotonin or dopamine, then you might stay in a stressed out state for much, much longer. Okay, so a lot of times in someone who has depression, what's happening is you don't release enough of those neurotransmitters, and you stay stressed out for a really long time. So somebody who has depression, this could be someone who is sitting in bed all day because they're too depressed to get out of bed, but they're still so exhausted. It's because their body is stressed all the time because they don't have the ability to turn off that stress response. Okay, so let's take a quick note. I've talked a lot about this thing called dopamine. Dopamine is often, people will get tattoos of dopamine, or they'll get tattoos of serotonin, or I guess not acetylcholine, but I think the big ones that people like are dopamine and serotonin, and because that tends to be, when you're taking an antidepressant, it's a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And so what that means is sometimes when you don't have enough of this neurotransmitter that is turning off your system or making you feel happy, it's because these reuptake things are basically sucking the chemical out of the synapse and not letting it get to its target. So if you're dumping all this dopamine into a system that's trying to make you feel better, but before the neurotransmitter can get to that system to feel better, it gets sucked right back up into the place where it came from, you can't feel the signal, okay? So a lot of antidepressants will act on these reuptake guys, and they're called inhibitors because they stop them from working. So then you have that neurotransmitter in the system for longer, and you're more likely to use it and feel better, okay? But there are many different kinds of neurotransmitters, and different neurotransmitters do different things in different situations. So everyone likes to talk about dopamine. Dopamine is what's released in a lot of drugs. So when you smoke, nicotine will cause you to have a lot of dopamine be released. If you quit smoking, you're not releasing as much dopamine, and so you don't feel as good. Okay, so sometimes people call it the love drug, or the love hormone, or the pleasure neurotransmitter. Because our brains it's like that Pavlovian response. We are keyed to do whatever releases dopamine because it makes us feel good, okay? Orgasms release dopamine, that kind of thing. The thing is, though, if you have way too much dopamine, you can also lead to things like obsessive behavior or stalker behavior, okay? There's a TED Ed talk with this guy who calls himself Dr. Love, and he talks about how all you need to be happy is 8 hugs a day. But if 8 strangers came up and hugged me, I would not release dopamine. I would be freaked the frick out, okay? So it's very, very situational. So dopamine is situational. If your brain is not primed to receive the goodness of a hug, then you're just going to be freaked out. You're not going to release dopamine, okay? So it's very, very situational. There are other neurotransmitters. We talked a lot about adrenaline. What adrenaline does is it prepares your body to take on a stress. So basically, this is what we call the fight or flight neurotransmitter. We'll talk about what that means in a second, unless I have left it out of my notes. Catch up with myself. Yeah, we'll get to it. Okay, but what it basically does is it prepares your muscles to get you out of a bad situation. Serotonin works with dopamine to stabilize mood. You don't have to know each of these. They're just very interesting to think about. Acetylcholine, often in ADHD, there's acetylcholine malfunction, and ADHD medication helps you concentrate better. Same thing with noradrenaline. These two things, they all work together in different responses depending on what you're doing. There's no one magic neurotransmitter that helps everything be perfect because we're just too complicated for that. If you get a rush of if you like getting tattoos, it's because when you are experiencing pain, your body wants you to get away from that pain because that pain is a stressor. But in order for you to survive the pain and move on and get away from whatever's stressing you out, you also release endorphins. And so endorphins make you feel good. And if you're doing exercise, your body doesn't understand, your brain doesn't understand that we do exercise on purpose because we are trying to be fit, right? Your body just says, if we're running, there's probably a lion that we're running from. We don't want the lion to catch us, so feel better about running, so you keep doing it. So that's our runner's high, okay? This is another thing that's released during sex, and it makes you feel happy and good. It reduces pain. So go back to the tattoo thing, if you're somebody who is you often see people get obsessed with tattoos because not only do they get to put art on their body, but that pain that they feel while they're getting tattooed gets replaced by the euphoria of the endorphin that's being released. Okay, so that's called an endorphin rush. Let's keep going. All right. So we talked about the nervous system. That's all about neurons talking to each other and releasing neurotransmitters for very quick action. The endocrine system, on the other hand, it's the only system in our body, well, one of the only systems that's kind of disconnected. There's just a bunch of glands all over our body that we call them all endocrine glands, and some of them are only a couple cells in the brain, etc. But what they do, they all have this one thing in common in that they release hormones, and in this situation specifically, these hormones prepare your body to respond to stress, and by doing this, they do so much stuff to cover both acute and chronic stress. So acute stress is get away really quickly so we can survive to live another day. Okay, chronic stress is going to be changing your physiology so that you can live with whatever stressor is happening. You may not live long, but at least you can live and try to get to a better state. So, and I don't mean like in New Jersey. I don't know if that's better. It's not getting to a better state like physically, but to get to a place where you're no longer stressed. So a chronic stressor would be always having high blood pressure because your brain doesn't understand, oh, I have to work this job, so I'm always going to be doing this thing that you think is a stressor. So that's why we have to actively work to decrease our stress. We'll get to it. Holy moly, let's look at all these things. So how does the nervous system and the endocrine system work together in an emergency? Again, any stress, your brain is going to treat the exact same way as an emergency situation. Okay, so a stress has happened. You realize you walk into class and there's a test you didn't know about. The very first thing that happens is your brain tells your adrenal glands to get activated and you release cortisol and adrenaline. Okay, so adrenaline is the neurotransmitter that goes and acts on the muscles really quickly. Cortisol is going to act slower to make, so the quick things are basically on-off switches, and these longer things that are controlled by hormones, these longer actions, take longer to turn on, but then they stay on longer. Okay, so these two hormones are going to, even though this is a neurotransmitter, it's also considered a hormone, they are going to trigger, that's not a thing, they're going to trigger physiological responses. There we go. Boop. So physiological responses, so changes in how your body is working. We call these the fight or flight responses. So your sympathetic system causes fight or flight symptoms or changes. Your parasympathetic, which is that relaxed state, we call the rest and digest system. Because if you are facing a major stressor, if your brain thinks you're about to fall off a cliff or something, be eaten by a lion, be hit by lightning, your physiology is going to change to get you out of that situation. So these are things where someone has been in a car accident and suddenly, or their loved one's in a car accident, and someone gets a boost of strength and can lift the car off of their loved one. Oh my God, where'd that strength come from? It comes from this immediate physiological change. Okay, so your heart rate's going to increase and your breathing's going to increase. And what that does is move oxygen to all of your muscles faster. Your hearing and vision become more acute, so the idea being you can hear and see stressors more easily. Okay, so I remember when I got a call that my mom had been in a car accident, when I was leaving my apartment to go to the hospital, I just, everything was the colors were so sharp. I just remember being like, wow, what is up with this day? The green in the tree is so sharp. And it's because I was so stressed out, my vision became really, really accurate and very, very acute so that my brain could take in everything going on so I could escape the stressor. Okay, it didn't happen. Your liver starts to release a lot of extra sugar in your bloodstream. Okay, so this means that, we store sugar in our blood. So we take in food. We're going to talk about this when we get to digestion. You take in food. If you take in any kind of carbs, any kind of sugar, you store it in your liver for a little while. After 24 hours, it becomes fat. Okay, so if you have any sugar stored in your liver, that gets released first into the bloodstream. Then that means that your muscles can take in a bunch of extra sugar right away if they need it. Yay! This is, we'll get to it. You're going to start sweating a lot more because you want to cool your muscles down as they're acting more quickly. and your brain is going to release endorphins so that you can not be in pain with depending on what you have to do to get away from that stressor. So let's say you talk to someone who you find incredibly attractive, or you're like just sitting next to them and suddenly they turn and they start talking to you. Now, to your brain, that might seem like a stressor because you are not prepared to talk to this beautiful, intelligent person who's suddenly talking to you. So your palms start sweating, your armpits start sweating, you just start sweating everywhere. Oh, why am I sweating so much? Because your brain thinks it's a stressor and wants you to get out of that situation because your brain is like, we can't handle this, it's so scary. Okay, so you're going to see more clearly and hear things better, but that might lead to memory distortion, which then means if you obsess then later about like, why did I say that thing? I remember hearing myself say this thing. Well, if you stress about that, you actually can kick up the stress system again, and that we'll talk about how that's a bad thing. But anyway, that's just an example of a stressor where you might experience some of these things. Now, it's hard. A lot of these things you can actually see happening. You can feel yourself starting to sweat. You can feel your heart start to race. You can see that your breathing is getting heavier or more quick. You can't always tell that, you can't feel it when your sugar is being released into your bloodstream, but this can be dangerous for people who are diabetic. Okay, so this is definitely something to consider. Now, so all of these things move you out of what's called homeostasis. So homeostasis is when your body is chill, it's in your rest and digest stage, and you're just doing whatever. Everything's great. If things get a little off, like if you're a little hot, you'll start to sweat a little, but it's not a stress because you're fixing homeostasis, getting back to where you need to be. Okay, these move everything out of homeostasis. So that's why we can define stress as something that moves you out of homeostasis. All of these things are basically on high alert. They put you on high alert and ready to take action so that you can get back to a state where you are in homeostasis and the danger has passed. Even if that danger is just, oh, that pretty person talked to me and I can't handle it. Okay, that's not going to kill you physically, usually, but your brain doesn't know any better. Okay. So homeostasis works a lot like your thermostat, okay? So it's maintaining that constant internal environment. So your thermostat, you set your thermostat to 77, let's say. If it gets too hot, your thermostat will turn on the AC, so it goes cooler, okay? Same thing happens with us. If we get too hot as individuals, or if we are suddenly working out and we're breaking a bunch of bonds in our muscles, we're going to start to release a lot of heat, and if that heat stays in our body, it can start to break down a bunch of proteins, and it's very bad for you, okay? So in order to change that so that you're not going to change your internal system in a bad way, you start to sweat, because sweating is going to move those hot molecules out of your body. If you get too cold, then you're going to start shivering, because that's going to release heat, and then you're going to move back to homeostasis by shivering and getting warm again. So it's always, so unlike in your AC where you have to either turn on the heat or turn on the cold, your body is always making sure you're at some set point. You might hear people say, well, I run hot, I run cold. That just means their homeostasis is slightly different than other people's. Okay, so homeostasis is maintaining a constant internal environment. And it's a central theme in physiology, which is how are we moving away from homeostasis? How do we maintain homeostasis? So if you are interested in anatomy and physiology class, they talk a lot about that. What do I want you to know about this? So we talked a little bit about the nervous system. I don't want this to run too long. Let's talk about this. So the nervous system breaks up into two parts that we kind of talked about already. The central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. Okay? The peripheral nervous system is all the nerves that come off of the brain and the spinal cord. So you think about, when you see something, there are nerves in your eye, in your retina, that take in light and send it to your brain. So the nerves in your eye are part of the peripheral nervous system, then they go to your brain, and that's the central nervous system, okay? If you step on a Lego, there's a signal that goes up your leg and to your spine, and then your spine has a reflex arc that automatically says, oh my god, we stepped on a Lego, move your foot, and then sends a signal back down through the peripheral nervous system. So you go from, this is going to, the peripheral nervous system takes in information, sends it to the central nervous system, and then the central nervous system sends back a signal saying, okay, now do this. Okay, so that's how we break that up. Your central nervous system also tells your peripheral nervous system if it's going to be acting, how do I say this? If you're doing something on purpose, like taking notes in a class or actively listening during lecture, that's part of your somatic system. That's what you're doing on purpose. Like, you have to actually tell your body, do the thing. Okay? Your autonomic system is the system that we don't have control over, except we can think ourselves into changing this sometimes. So, for example, thank goodness we can't control our heart rates. It's a good thing our heart rate is controlled by our brainstem, because if you can imagine having to take all of these classes and redo all the homework and have a job and have kids and feed the dog, etc., on top of having to control your heart rate by saying, okay, beat, 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 we would go insane. And so it's a good thing a lot of what's happening in our body is controlled by the autonomic or automatic part of the nervous system. Now, that autonomic part of our nervous system can either keep us in the parasympathetic state. So the parasympathetic system is that rest and digest. That's the you can digest your food, you can make some new sperm, you can heal a wound, all these things that your body does to maintain homeostasis. Okay, so the normal thing. When you activate the sympathetic nervous system, you're activating that stress response, and that is the fight or flight. And really, so every endocrinologist ever makes the same joke. I'm guilty of the same thing, called the 4 Fs. So it's fight, flight, freeze, or reproduce. Get it? And so the idea is a lot of different animals, not including humans, but so humans are very good at either fight, flight, or freezing during a stressful response. So this is that freeze is that deer in the headlights look, like, what? I don't know what to do in this situation, and you just freeze. Fight is the literally something bad happened. Do I want to fight about it? In one of my high school classes today, there was a 16-year-old who just got his new car. His dad bought him this very fancy car, and he was very excited about it, was telling everyone about it, and then someone made some kind of joke about it, and the kid suddenly lost his mind and got really aggressive, just like started screaming. And so we sat down and we talked about, what's going on here, dude? And it turns out his dad bought him a car because his dad is never around, and he has this fancy Hollywood job that keeps him away from his family. He's divorced, and he just never sees his kid. So the way that he is trying to make it up and suck up to the kid is he bought him this really fancy car. And so the kid is, excited about this new car, but it also represents his dad not being there for him. So even though this is not a physiological response, when somebody made a joke about it, it activated his sympathetic system and he wanted to fight about it because suddenly he perceived that as a threat against, I don't know, his 16-year-old masculinity. I have no idea. I'm not a psychologist. I'm just a physiologist. But you could see the switch from just being excited and proud of his car to, oh my God, I'm going to fight you because you made a joke about my car. So that's definitely not something we control, but it's a clear change from that parasympathetic to sympathetic system. Your sympathetic system is going to turn off things that are normally on during parasympathetic. There's no reason to digest your food if you're about to be eaten by a lion, because that's energy that you are wasting basically by trying to break down food that's not ready yet, that you could be using in your muscles to get away from a tiger or a lion or whatever the analogy is. Okay, so these are your sympathetic system turns on things that you need to escape a stressor and turns off things that if you don't escape that stressor, you're gonna die anyway, so why bother? A lot of times people who are really, really stressed out won't menstruate, they don't ovulate, because their body thinks, we're gonna die at any moment, we have to get out of the situation. Why am I gonna make an egg when I need to make sure we don't die instead? The same thing happens with immune responses. You see people, they will go into, so if you have chronic stress, you tend to get sick a lot because your body says, we've been trying to make you better, it's not working, I'm not going to heal that wound if you're just going to die of something else instead, blah, blah, blah. And you see that people who are overly stressed end up sick and they don't heal very well, etc., etc., because if you overactivate the system, you're basically wearing everything else out and not allowing yourself to rest. Okay, so I already said all of these things, so I'm not going to repeat it. So let's talk about the general adaptation system. Do we want to talk about that now? Let's see. There's so much lecture left. Ta-da-da. Yeah, we're going to go into it. So the general adaptation system is so first we have an alarm reaction, like, what's that thing? So you perceive a stressor, Okay? And then a lot of times this is where you freak out and something happens, you run away, you have a bad reaction to something. Okay? So someone makes fun of you or something and you react badly to it, or you start working out and you get really sore. Okay, then you go into what's called the resistance stage. So if you adapt to that stressor and you realize, oh, if someone makes fun of me, it's on them and not me, or if I keep exercising, it's good to be sore and I'm going to do it again and I'm going to get better at it, then the next time it happens, you don't have that alarm reaction, you just resist. Okay? And then, after if you experience that stress for too long, if it's not something that's making you healthy, you could actually go into what's called adaptive resistance, which means that you get so exhausted, you exhaust all your resources, that you start to wear down your body, okay? So, you no longer respond to things you should. So this is a lot of what depression is, okay? So you react to... something bad happens and you go into this alarm reaction, and then your body's like, oh my god, we're going to be freaked out forever, because we just are. That's just our body now. Everything is horrible forever. We're just always going to maintain that same level of vigilance just in case something bad happens again. Okay? Then you just wear yourself out so much that months and years later, you basically have worn out so much of your body, like you have high blood pressure for so long that you can die young, okay? Just by this stress making this happen. Okay, so that is a bad adaptation. So if you are doing something, what the kind of response you actually want is for you have an alarm reaction and you don't overreact, okay? So because a lot of this we do to ourselves by thinking about it, we're going to talk about it. Let's keep going. Okay. I think this lecture has gone on a long time, and I'm starting to get feeling some stress, and I don't want to overstress. I don't want to overstress you. I think I'll finish this lecture tomorrow, and we will do that. So thank you guys for hanging in for this long and listening to me babble about stress. It actually is a really good thing for you guys to know about, because almost all of our leading causes of death in the U.S. are caused by stress. And so this is a good thing to learn about so that you can learn how to maintain your own stress levels at a healthy level, and we'll go into that more later. Good night. Whoops, I know I keep doing that, you guys. That's not going to stop it. Good night.